Hey everyone, welcome back to The Empowered Advocate. I'm Mary Holloman, the Communications Director here at the Pregnancy Network. And yes, I'm saying the Pregnancy Network because it's official. We are the Pregnancy Network. If you've been following along with us for a while, you know that our former name was Greensboro Pregnancy Care Center, but we've switched to a new name because later this year we will be expanding further into the triad. And we are just so excited about it. So, same name, or no, not same name, same mission, new name, but everything about what we do and what we stand for and why we're here has remained exactly the same. So, we hope you'll keep following along. I am so excited about this week's episode, and we're going to jump right into it. I'm going to give you a brief bio of our guest speaker. Her name is Melissa Ohden, and if you are not familiar, Melissa is an abortion survivor. She shares with us her story, and it really is incredible. I mean, I can't count how many times throughout this episode, I say the word wow as I'm listening to her. I'm just like a broken record. Wow, wow, wow. Because it really is a wow story. But just to give you a little background on Melissa, Melissa is a master's level prepared social worker and also the founder of the Abortion Survivors Network. As an abortion survivor herself with a background in crisis counseling, addiction treatment, and child welfare, she is passionate about helping others embrace their lives, find healing and love and forgiveness in the midst of difficult circumstances. She is the author of You Carried Me, a Daughter's Memoir, and will be releasing a new book, an anthology of survivor stories and abortion survivor history in 2021. She is married to her husband, Ryan, and she's the mother to two daughters, Olivia and Ava, and they live in Kansas City, Missouri. Just a quick note, as you're listening throughout the episode, you may hear a little bit of feedback here and there, and that is because this conversation took place while she was in Missouri. So just bear with us on some of the sound issues there, but you can still hear everything, and I know you're going to enjoy the story. Let's jump right into it. All right. Hey, Empowered Advocate listeners. We're so excited about this week's episode. We have a special guest with us. Her name is Melissa Ohden, and she has a really cool story to share. Melissa, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we've been looking forward to this. So I know, Melissa, you've been sharing your story for a while, and for those who are familiar with like the pro-life world, I'm sure your name sounds familiar, but there may be a lot of our listeners who have not heard your story before. So what I want to do is just to give you the floor and give you the chance to kind of share how you got involved doing what you do now and your story, because it's pretty amazing. Like I was telling you before off camera or off recording, that the first time I heard your story, I was like, that is just so incredible. It can't be true. And it was just, so it's been really neat to hear what God's done in your life. But just go ahead and share from the beginning, really, how your story got started.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's really timely that we hear stories like mine because in particular, 2019 really, I think, ushered in this change that we saw not only in the pro-life movement, but in our greater culture when it came to, abortion legislation being expanded very aggressively. People can remember New York, what almost happened in Virginia. People don't often think about what did happen in Illinois. That's, a lot of these things happen behind the scenes, right? And there's almost too much to keep up on sometimes. But in the midst of all of that legislation, there was also legislation about, born alive protection. And at the federal level, we've continued to see obstacles to that being passed. Then we've seen in other states protections for survivors being stripped. And I think sometimes even in the pro-life movement, right, people are going, I don't even know what's really real anymore, right? Like, I don't know what's true. I don't know if we should have a law like this. Does this really happen? And I'm here to tell you that it does happen through my own personal experience and through the work that I do now with the Abortion Survivors Network. So I am, I'll age myself very quickly. I'm 42. It's okay. It's for illustrative purposes. But it's an important context because, we know abortion was legalized 47 years ago. And in the midst of that, one of the most common abortion procedures back then was the saline infusion abortion. And so if your listeners look back through the history, what they'll find is that even the abortion industry and really medical professionals who were performing them in late in pregnancy were telling the stories of piles after piles of blackened babies from saline solution. And not all of those children were delivered successfully as an abortion, right? They were born alive. And so this has been happening ever since, really even long before abortion was even legalized. But, what I always want people to understand is legalized abortion ushered in more and more circumstances of survivors happening because so many more abortions were being performed. And that's who I am. I was one of those aborted babies who was accidentally born alive. My story in some ways is dramatic, in other ways is very common when I know survivor stories. But, I know my birth mother looked an awful lot like the women who come through the doors of your pregnancy center still today. She was 19. She was a college student. She wasn't married to my biological father. And she was not given any choice when it came to that saline infusion abortion. Someone else made that choice for her. And I know that you all see those dynamics so often. It's the, very well-intentioned friends, family members, medical professionals, who are often that driving force behind the abortion decision. And in my birth mother's circumstances, it was her mother, very common. I think what makes my grandmother and my birth mother's circumstance a little bit different is my grandmother was a prominent nurse in their community in Sioux City, Iowa, had a close working relationship with the abortionist. From what we've been told, he owed her a really big favor.
Wow.
And so that's how they were able to force this abortion upon my birth mother. She did not want to have this abortion. She would have married my birth father. They would have parented me. But my grandmother was not pleased at that time with her being pregnant out of wedlock. Back then it was a much greater issue. And so they bypassed hospital regulations and procedures, performed the saline infusion abortion, believing no one would ever find out that it wasn't her choice. And I know this abortion procedure is not pleasant to hear about. None of them ever are, but
Tell us.
that saline infusion abortion actually involved injecting a toxic salt solution into the amniotic fluid surrounding the preborn baby in the womb. And so usually the procedure lasted about 72 hours. The child would soak in that toxic salt solution, being poisoned and scalded to death. And then they would induce labor with the intent of that deceased child being expelled from the womb.
Mm-hmm. So how far along was your birth mother at this point?
That's such a good question. And it's so interesting because it points back to really the lies of the abortion industry. My medical records reflect the abortionist, or we think maybe even my grandmother, had written down that they estimated her to be 18 to 20 weeks pregnant based on her last menstrual period, right? But my birth mother was having irregular periods all the time. She was an athlete, right? So they did not perform an adequate exam, which again, we hear this still today, right? 42 years later, the same things keep happening. So they wrote 18 to 20 weeks pregnant, but the fact that I was able to survive that failed abortion actually points to the fact she was much further along. And a neonatologist remarked in my records after I was born alive that I was probably 31 weeks.
Wow.
I mean, just last night, I was emailing back and forth with another survivor, and she's actually the director of a pregnancy center. She's getting to know her story. She's just finally piecing it together. And she said, Melissa, I'm not sure. My birth mother's not sure if the abortionist just stopped performing the abortion because I was much further along gestationally than what they thought, or he just didn't want to perform the abortion, right? Mm-hmm. And I see this all of the time. We have so many survivors who the abortionist starts, let's say the vacuum aspiration, right? I mean, this is not pleasant to hear about, but this is what I deal with every day.
Yeah.
They're preparing to remove the child from the womb with a vacuum, and the abortionist starts the abortion and goes, oh my goodness, this baby's head is too large, right?
Mm.
This baby is much further along. And so you're going to have to pay more for this abortion procedure,
Yep.
or I'm not going to do it.
Wow. So it sounds like from what you're saying, this happens a lot because, you know, the culture, the media tries to tell us this never happens. Like, why are we even talking about this? It's not an issue.
It breaks my heart. I mean, it honestly fuels my passion. I mean, I think
Yeah.
people know that about me. I have a passion in my soul for the truth when it comes to abortion and, you know, women receiving services and support. But for true, you know, our culture to truly see the lives of survivors. You know, I hear this all the time where they say, "Oh, it's so controversial." We're just fellow human beings, right?
Yeah.
We just see the dignity and value of our lives as they are and not see us as some threat
Right.
to
Yeah.
the abortion industry. That part for me is very sad.
Yeah. And so you said they started the abortion, and I think I remember reading it went on for a long time, right?
It did.
Yeah. Talk about that.
Yeah, it should have been completed within about 72 hours. So typically the child's life in the saline infusion was ended within about the first 24 hours. And then they would induce labor, and then that deceased child would be expelled from the womb when things went correctly.
Right.
But through my medical records, we know that I actually soaked in that toxic salt solution for 5 days. They could not successfully induce my birth mother's labor. And, you know, now that I know as much as I do about what happened to her, they really thought that she was going to die. I mean, they could not figure out why the abortion was taking that long. And, you know, I think that's important when people care about women's health, right? And the well-being of women. My birth mother's life was at risk.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So even though I was the intended victim, she was victimized by that in a huge way. And, you know, gratefully, both of our lives were spared.
Wow. And so when you were finally born, and I guess obviously the doctor realized you were very much alive, what took place after that? What were kind of the next steps?
Yeah, it's interesting because so I'm adopted, and my adoptive parents, you know, are pretty quiet people. I was not raised to be part of the pro-life movement, right? My parents are pro-life, but I was never, you know, given my story to go and change the world.
Right.
But my parents very quietly kept many secrets, and one of the secrets that they kept was they had been told when they adopted me that the abortionist demanded that I be left to die in the hospital after I was born alive. And for years I didn't talk about it, right? Couldn't really make sense of it. Some of this hurts so much that you think I'm never going to say this out loud, right? And I don't want people to think it's crazy, right? Like when you heard my story, it's like but God brings about these miracles. And so we actually now know that it was my grandmother who demanded that day that I be left to die. She heavily monitored the abortion procedure, you know, came face to face with me that day. I was her firstborn grandchild.
Wow.
She told the nursing staff to leave me to die. And my mom and dad had heard about a couple of nurses who were unwilling to do that. And I've kind of lived my life thinking, yeah, I'll probably never hear from them, right? I mean, there's HIPAA and there's so many things involved. But I was contacted by a nurse directly about 3 years ago when my book, You Carried Me, was first released. And she reached out to me and said, you know, Melissa, I've always wondered if you were the baby. I've been following you on social media. Always wondered if you were the baby that I remembered from St. Luke's. And she had read my book and she said, I know it's you.
So she was the one who came and got you?
She was the one who received me in the NICU that day.
Okay, gotcha.
I wasn't there when I was delivered alive, but she was able to share the story of how the door came flying open that day when she was working in the NICU, and this tall blonde nurse rushed me in because she was unwilling to just leave me there to die.
Man, what a gift that you've been given these pieces, like to piece together what happened. I mean, that's such a God thing.
Yeah, and I think that's one of those things that I think mainstream culture don't think about, right? Like the reason why so many survivors don't share their story is, you know, first of all, we live in a pretty oppressive culture when it comes to the pro-life message in general, and then the lives of survivors when we're told you don't exist, right? You must be lying. all of those things. Survivors are watching this and going, yeah, okay, this is not safe for me, right? I'm already traumatized by my past. This is not a safe place for my future. But also, so many survivors don't have kind of this. I mean, I say luxury, but it's just a God thing. They don't have the luxury to have all of those pieces to the puzzle that I've been given. And I do truly believe, Mary, that this was just part of God's intention for me, because that knowledge of my life story has then given me like that strength to then go forward and not only share my story, but fight for survivors and for life.
Yeah, well, I'm sure, like you're just saying, your story has given boldness to other, women and men who have walked through that experience to say, okay, I can come forward and share what's happened to me. So you were placed for adoption then. So what did your parents know right away the circumstances of how you got to the NICU, or so they did? So they kind of kept that under wraps for a while.
Yeah, my mom and dad had been foster parents for a long time, suffered with infertility for 15 years before they ended up having a biological child of their own all those years later. But so they were foster parents, then they adopted my older sister, and then they adopted me. And, I was technically a special needs adoption because they really weren't sure what my future was going to look like. The doctors thought I would suffer from, a multitude of disabilities. And so my parents knew about surviving the abortion, kept that a secret like most parents do. So I was raised knowing I was adopted, but didn't find out my survival story until I was a teenager.
Okay. So when you did find that out, what sort of impact did that have on you to learn, you knew you were adopted, but to learn that whole other piece?
I wish I could say it was positive, but I don't know that can, be initially positive for anybody, no matter what age they are. I was absolutely devastated by that news. I never suspected anything like this. Back then I did not know that abortions could fail and that children could survive. And so all of it just came crashing down. And, back then I felt it in my spirit. I knew God spared my life and I knew He had a purpose for me. But I think you have to walk through the pain sometimes before you can really embrace your purpose. And so I walked out that pain at the age of 14. Didn't want to be the girl who survived an abortion, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
At the age of 14, you just want to be like everybody else, right? And so it was this really lonely place for me to be. And so, had to really work through the anger and resentment towards my biological parents, had to, really overcome the shame and embarrassment that I felt for my life circumstances, and even work through that guilt. We know we've lost about 61 million lives to abortion in the United States alone. And, I still wake up some days and think, why me? Right? Yeah. I mean, I would give my life for any one of those other children to have the same opportunity.
And I think it's such a, the fact that you did survive, well, now you're using your life to advocate for those that did not survive. That's like, I think a perfect example of Romans 8, how God takes these circumstances and brings life out of them, and He uses them for His purposes. So that's amazing.
Yeah. And I hope your supporters and your listeners can relate to that too, right? We all have something in our life story that we wish we could change.
Right.
That part that we want to edit, control, whatever it is. And, I think that's probably the greatest gift for me in my life and my journey has been to see, okay, Lord, you will continue to use all of this for good. And we don't know if it's going to take a day, a week, 10 years, whatever it is. He's just never done using it.
Right. That's good. So you found out the truth about your circumstances when you were born. When did you make the decision to try to find out who your birth mother was? What did that look like?
Yeah, I was pretty early on in that process. I really did have to work through all of those emotions and forgive them for the first time. And I say first time because this is a continuous process for me. I'm not ever done forgiving And again, I think that's a life lesson for all of us. It's not this destination where we get to arrive and go, I forgive you and everything's good.
Yeah.
Life happens, and we are having to choose to walk that out every day. So first forgiving them really put me in that position that I felt like I needed to go looking for them, so they knew that I was alive and well and not angry, not bitter. And so started looking for them when I was about 19. Didn't find them until I was almost 30.
Wow.
It was also kind of this, puzzle piece weaving together the pieces of that puzzle. I knew a lot about my biological family through my adoption records, but I didn't know how all of this works. I didn't know, back then I didn't know really that the abortion industry or even hospitals don't like to document circumstances like mine, right? I was just thinking, gosh, I'm going to go looking for my medical records. I'm going to look for my biological parents. And, if God intends for me to share this with the world, it's going to happen. And it took me 10 years.
Wow. That's amazing. So you did end up finding your birth mother. And I think for me, hearing this piece of your story was just like the yes part of it. So talk about that, about how you found her and you were able to meet her.
Yeah, that was another, kind of complicated, long journey. So I found out who she was in 2007 through my medical records. I had found out who her parents were right before that, just kind of through all of my investigation, but I would not have known which of their daughters was my birth mother. And so found her through my medical records, but couldn't find her physically through searching. So I sent a letter to her parents, not knowing that my grandmother was responsible. And, part of me looks back on that and goes, geez, Melissa, I can't believe you sent them a letter. But that's a Holy Spirit thing, right? Because they probably needed to hear from me as much as she did. And, unfortunately, when I sent them a letter, my grandfather, he did reply, but made it clear that my messages would not be passed along to her because they were completely estranged. And, really just continue to pray and just, lean into God and say, if I'm ever to find her, it's going to happen. And I trust whatever your plan is. And it took another 6 years before one of her family members reached out to me. And so it was back in 2013 that my cousin contacted me and shared that the abortion was forced. That was not anything my parents knew. She also had shared that, my grandmother was responsible for so much of it and connected me with my half sisters. I have two half sisters on my birth mother's side of the family, and then also opened the lines of communication with my birth mother.
Wow.
And after that, though, it once again took about another 3 years before we met face to face for the first time. And that was really because we needed to learn to trust one another. In particular, she needed to trust me. I had no idea how traumatized she had been, not only by that abortion, but really by her family. I was loved unconditionally, period, end of sentence. And she was not. And so she had carried so much regret from that abortion throughout her life. And what I never could have suspected is that she also spent over 30 years believing that I had died that day.
Wow.
That's the part, right, where I know you hear that and you're like, no way.
Yeah, seriously.
This is like a Hallmark movie. But Hallmark wouldn't want to share it. But
The truth, yeah.
yeah, but she did not know. And it's funny because God continues to unfold pieces of that circumstance too. She was told the abortion had been successful, didn't know if it had been a little boy or a little girl. And I always like to remind people, right, think about how many days she was put under the distress of that abortion procedure, physically, emotionally, mentally. She was heavily sedated, right, in so much pain. They thought she was dying. So she was not in any position to know what was happening around her. And she trusted her mother, right? When her mother said the abortion was successful, your baby is dead, go on with your life. And she never could go on with her life.
So how did she hear about you? Who did she hear from?
Well, as much as I wanted them to hear from me before I ever shared my story publicly, unfortunately, because my grandparents didn't pass along those messages, she found out because a family member saw me on TV.
Wow. Man, what a shock.
And they knew. It was. you can imagine the incredible shock that which she went through, but yet at the same time, right, this great sense of joy of, oh my gosh, she's alive.
Yeah.
But we had to spend a number of years really working through that because I was the first person who ever was honest with her about it, shared our medical records, all of those things that had been taken away from her. And
Yeah.
so we met face to face for the first time, gosh, about 4 years ago now.
Wow.
It's almost indescribable, I think, to talk about it. It was just one of those moments that's just so special, right? You know that God planned that moment from the very beginning, and that time and time again, humans kept throwing up roadblocks to his plan, but ultimately it happened. And we met at a public place. My half sister was there, and her kids, and one of my children, and we we held each other that day when we first met, and I just said, it's been a really long time. And she
Wow.
said, I never got to hold you.
Wow.
And that's why you do what you do. It never should have been this way.
Right.
It could have been so different. And, she's an amazing woman. My birth mother is so strong and so courageous. But she looks upon my life and always tries to see the positive in it and says, Melissa, you were meant to be with your mom and dad, right? And you were meant to be exactly who you are in this world. But I look back on it and I go, I'm grateful for all this. Yes, I know it's God's plan, but it could have been this way with her making an adoption plan. It could have been this way with her receiving the support of a pregnancy center, right? We didn't have to go through all of this.
And yeah, you already mentioned it, but she was impacted so much. And this idea that abortion is for women, it's healthcare for women, it's empowering women. My goodness, like your birth mother's life was just completely derailed by this. Is completely opposite of what the narrative is. That's just so amazing. So it sounds like you guys still have a relationship today and you're connected. That is amazing.
We do. One of the things I didn't share when my book first came out was we live in Kansas City. So we actually met in Kansas City, and not just because I live here, but because she lives here also.
Oh, come on.
I know. Just because and God and I have had this conversation of like, could this get any crazier?
Right.
Lord. But that's why her family reached out to me when they did, because I had announced publicly that we were moving here, and her family had this moment of like, I think we need to tell her.
Yeah.
And so, my kids see my birth mother as often, and myself included, but we see her as often as we can. We'll be getting together with my sister, one of my sisters lives here too.
Of course.
He keeps outdoing himself.
Yeah.
But we'll be getting together with my sister and her kids for spring break next week. And, my kids know my birth mom as one of their grandmothers. It's as natural as we can make it.
That's amazing. That's so cool. It's just such a beautiful picture of redemption, honestly. I mean, who could do that but God? Now, I know you founded the Abortion Survivors Network. So how did you go from having this experience? Like, what was the timeline for founding this organization? How did that come about? Like, yeah, just share about that piece of it.
I'm laughing because I'm historically one of the most impatient people you could probably ever meet in your life, right? I am like this typical type A. I'm going to get it done yesterday, right? Like that's just who I've been from the beginning. And, God has really performed this great work in me to be like, slow down, right? Slow down, wait a minute. You are going to trust in me and how this rolls out. So, I started speaking publicly in about 2007. Ended up giving up my career as an MSW. So I worked, in domestic violence, substance abuse, right, child welfare, all of these things. Gave up my career in about 2010 because I was being asked to, speak so much and get involved in legislative things. And so gave up my career in 2010. And really everywhere I went, somebody would whisper in my ear or send me a message and say, I'm a survivor too.
Wow.
And so really started to get that calling in about 2012. And so formed the Abortion Survivors Network back then. And, really had these plans of it being a 501c3 and really just doing these big things. And, back then survivors would just kind of send us a message and say, thanks for what you're doing. Grateful that I'm not alone. See you later. And I get that. We have a lot of trust issues, right? It's hard to share our story. But what ended up happening really in 2019 is with all of this starting to hit the news and really mainstream media starting to share our stories for the first time, not always in a positive light, but whatever, more survivors came forward, and not just more survivors, but survivors saying, I want to do something. I want to be a part of this. So we became a 501c3. We are almost through the process of a 501c4 because unfortunately we do have to get involved on the political side of things until culture comes alongside and respects life and sees the dignity of survivors' lives. We do have to shape that legislatively. And so, yeah, we support survivors now, both socially and emotionally. I've been writing a healing curriculum that's in the editing process right now. I really actually hope to get it in the hands of pregnancy centers.
That'd be wonderful. Yeah.
I truly believe that you have been serving people who are survivors all along. They may not talk about it, or they may not even know it. I have survivors who had abortions themselves and found out much later in their life that they survived an abortion.
Wow.
So they've got both sides of the abortion experience. So this healing curriculum isn't just something that we're going to use. I think we are going to try to roll it out to pregnancy centers. We're holding our first retreat later this year. People may have seen the ad we did with a group called Faces of
Yeah,
Choice.
I saw that. That was amazing. Just seeing all the faces was so impactful. I mean, you hear numbers all the time, and we have a hard time connecting that these are actual people. So I loved that concept.
Yeah, and you're going to see more media projects like that. We know stories impact people, right? This is how we create change and we impact culture. And so, yeah, you're going to keep seeing more media projects like that. And I think survivor stories are going to surprise you in every good way. I'm surprised, even though I am years deep in this. Every time I hear a story, it just takes my breath away.
That's great. And I love that idea of getting it into pregnancy centers because, if you're in that position, where do you go like to talk to someone about that? I mean, we see that with women who have had abortions. They don't feel like they have a place to go. So by offering that, I mean, what a great outlet, a safe place for women and men. I love that.
Yeah, one of my board members said we want this to be an oasis, right?
Mm-hmm. That's good. That's good. Well, I know you mentioned the political side of things. So what has that looked like for you? I know you've had the opportunity to testify before on occasion. So what's that piece been like? Did you ever see yourself kind of going down that avenue?
I'm pretty sure you can tell by my laughter that no, I did not sense this. Although interestingly enough, right, years ago, my passion was politics. I went to college studying pre-law and politics, and I had a passion for that. But because of my survivor background, really, I experienced a lot of shame through other people on my college campus, and so ended up changing majors, right, and changing life course. And so I do kind of love that God has brought me back and said, that passion you had in your heart, I see it. And that was part of my calling for you. And so, yeah, I've testified before Congress probably 4 times. I don't know. I don't keep track anymore. I get asked to go meet with members of Congress, lobby, do press conferences. I testify at the state level, send in a lot of written testimony just because I can't get everywhere. But really, that's part of what we're going to do through the Abortion Survivors Network is have this bureau side of things where people can easily access testimonies and send them out there, right? I mean, if we're going to keep hearing that same old argument that we don't exist, then we have to equip the pro-life movement with the stories and the statistics that can battle that a little bit. So yeah, I tend to be all over the place at this point.
So you've been pretty busy. That's great. Well, I'd love to tell our listeners about your book, You Carried
Mhm.
Me. And I believe you were sending me in your email. You are working on another book as well, or is that tell me more about that, about your book now, and like where people can find it. Because we definitely, if you're listening, we definitely want you to go grab a copy of it so you can get even more details about Melissa's story.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, You Carried Me, A Daughter's Memoir came out in 2017 originally, but we just re-released it in paperback form. So if people find the hardcover, that's the first edition. The second edition that was just re-released is a paperback copy. The good news is it's cheaper. And the really great news is that it actually includes more pictures with my birth mother, and my birth mom and I wrote an epilogue to it that ties up some of the loose ends, I think. So they can find that on Amazon. You can find it through Plow Publishing. Pretty much anywhere books are sold, I think they have it right now. And then, yes, coming in 2021 will be another book. I'm writing with a best-selling author. I'm not at liberty yet to say who it is, I don't think, but we'll just say it's good. Okay, it is so good. And I am just beyond excited for the kind of impact that it's going to make. So we'll probably have about 10 to 12 abortion survivor stories. Just really weave in all of the pieces of data and history when it comes to the lives of survivors. I mean, this exists. I read through it every single day, but most lay people don't have the time or the energy to go digging for it. And that's where our culture buries it, right? Deeper and deeper and deeper. And so we're going to pull it out from under the shadows and put it in people's fingertips. So when somebody is saying, yeah, no, this doesn't happen, you can go, hey, just a minute, let me get this book.
Let me show you. Yeah, that's great. And just like you said, stories are what changes people's hearts and minds on things. So I can't wait for that. That's great. So where can everybody follow you on social media and kind of keep up with you and what you're doing?
Yeah, my website is Melissa Ohden, OHDEN.com. For the Abortion Survivors Network, that is theabortionsurvivors.com. On social media, my handle is pretty just the same every time, at Melissa Ohden. Thanks to my husband's last name, nobody else has it. So at Melissa Ohden to find me, to find the Abortion Survivors Network. Most of the time, it's just under the Abortion Survivors Network. So Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all the good stuff.
Great, great. Well, Melissa, thank you so much for taking this time to share your story. And yeah, listeners, go follow her on Instagram, Facebook, everywhere. Make sure you get a copy of her book, and I will definitely I'll pre-order that new book. Do you have a title for it yet?
We don't yet.
You don't yet? Okay. Well, I'll be on the lookout for it. Well, thank you so much for all of your hard work
Thank you.
and just being a voice for the voiceless and creating this network of people. I mean, what a gift that this group of survivors, they have, like, in a sense, a home, an oasis, like you said. That's really great. Is there anything you would say to people who are listening who are, would identify as pro-life but have been kind of on the fence about, getting involved, being proactive, or even maybe haven't even totally believed the idea that there are failed abortions? What would you say to them?
I'm just one of hundreds, if not thousands, if not probably tens of thousands of abortion survivors, to be honest. And we're going to start to hopefully see some of that data because we deserve that. Our culture deserves to know that. So we do exist. And I think for people who are thinking, gosh, you know what, I love the work of your pregnancy center, but I would never do that, right? I'll write you a check. I know that you're grateful for their checks. But every single one of us have gifts. We have talents. This is not just, God calling Melissa out to be a public speaker, right? This is about really following him and saying yes. And when you say yes, suddenly you have all of these gifts and they are multiplied a million times over. And I want other people to have that same opportunity to experience that, because it is life-giving in return and it is life-changing to do that. And so if you have listeners who are saying, I'll do just that little thing, don't be afraid to keep saying yes, because it is just the most amazing journey to be on, and to see the blessings that come from other people through the midst of that. Everybody deserves that.
We hope you enjoyed this episode and that you will go to Amazon right now and snag a copy of Melissa's book, You Carried Me, A Daughter's Memoir. And if you look in the show notes, we'll also list her website and all of her social media handles so you can know where to go to follow her and keep up with things that are going on. Also, and Melissa mentioned this about getting involved with pregnancy centers. If you want to get involved here at the Pregnancy Network, we would love to have you. If you're local in the Greensboro area, we invite you to come on out to our next open house event. You can go to our website, thepregnancy.network.org/open house, and you'll see the registration form there. It'll let you know when our next dates and times are. Come here. That's your open door to getting involved. We will get you connected so that you can play a part in this role of empowering women to face their unplanned pregnancies without fear. Thanks so much. Keep following us, and we'll see you next time.